It feels like we live in a world of overlapping crises, right? A health crisis triggers an economic one. A climate event completely disrupts global supply chains. Today, we're going to dig into a powerful new framework that helps us see the hidden connections between these events, showing us how a single shock can literally ripple across the entire globe.
You know that feeling, right? One crisis just seems to bleed into the next. A public health event messes with supply chains, an energy shortage sends the economy into a spin. It feels like we're constantly lurching from one problem to another. So the big question is, why? Is there some hidden pattern connecting all these seemingly separate events? Well, it turns out there is.
Okay, so imagine our modern world as this incredibly intricate set of dominoes. A single push in one area, whether it's ecology, technology, or the economy, it doesn't just knock over one piece. No, it can trigger a massive chain reaction. This framework we're looking at is like the blueprint. It doesn't just show us that the dominoes fall, it reveals the hidden architecture of how and why they were lined up that way in the first place.
And this gets right to the heart of the problem. We see these chain reactions happening all around us, but our tools for understanding them have been totally siloed. You've got ecologists looking at tipping points over here, network scientists studying failures over there, and economists analyzing crises in their own little bubble. It's like everyone has a single piece of the puzzle, but nobody's been looking at the whole board.
So, how do we start seeing that whole board? Well, the first piece of this puzzle is a concept called the viability envelope, and you can think of it as the secret to understanding any system's survival zone.
So what on earth is a viability envelope? Honestly, the simplest way to think about it is like a Goldilocks zone for any system. It's that specific range of conditions where things are just right for that system to stay organized and keep functioning. If you step outside that zone, well, that's when things start to unravel.
And this concept, it applies to absolutely everything. For a plant, its survival zone is all about getting the right amount of sunlight and water. For an economy, it needs things like stable liquidity and supply chains that actually work. And for our entire planet's climate, it's about staying within a stable temperature range. You push any of these systems outside their comfort zone and they begin to fail. Every single system has its limits. But here's the thing, and this is so important. None of these systems exist in a vacuum. They're all deeply, deeply interconnected. And figuring out how they overlap is where this framework becomes truly powerful.
This is the big picture. You have these different worlds: ecology, technology, the economy. And each one has its own unique survival zone. But the really critical area is that little overlap zone right in the middle. That's the sweet spot. That's the narrow set of conditions where our environment, our technology, and our economy can all function happily together. And you can probably guess, the smaller that zone gets, the more fragile our entire world becomes.
So what connects these different worlds? What's the glue? Well, they're linked by what the framework calls shared parameters. You can think of these as the fundamental non-negotiable resources we all depend on, things like energy, water, and a stable temperature. These are the common threads that tie the fate of one system directly to another. And right here, you can see it in action. Climate stability, it hinges on temperature. Ecological health, it relies on water availability. The economy, it's dead without supply chain integrity. And our technology, it needs a constant energy supply. It becomes crystal clear, a shock to a single shared parameter, like a disruption in energy or water, isn't just going to affect one domain. It's going to send shockwaves through all of them.
Okay, so we've got these interconnected survival zones, all linked up by shared resources. Now for the crucial question, what actually makes the dominoes start to fall? It turns out there's a specific recipe for disaster, and it has 3 key ingredients.
Here's the 3-step recipe. First, you need a shock to a shared resource, let's say a sudden energy crisis. Second, that shock has to push at least one system to the very edge of its survival zone, into a fragile state we can call the wobble zone. And third, there has to be a pathway for that instability to spread. When all 3 of those conditions are met, a local problem can go global and fast. Let's zoom in on that wobble zone. A healthy system is like a marble resting at the bottom of a deep bowl. It's resilient. You can nudge it, and it just rolls right back to the center. But a system in this wobble zone, or metastable window, is like a marble balanced precariously on the rim of that bowl. It's fragile. The slightest nudge can send it tumbling, and its ability to recover is slow, uncertain, maybe even gone.
And finally, we get to that third ingredient, the pathway. How does a crisis in one area actually jump to another? Well, this model shows us that instability spreads along 3 distinct types of highways that connect our different worlds.
A crisis can spread physically, like a drought creating a very real water shortage.
It can spread structurally, like when a key company fails, and that breaks an entire supply chain. And it can spread informationally, when fear itself, like a rumor about a bank's collapse, triggers a widespread market panic. 3 very different pathways, all leading to a potential cascade.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? This framework gives us a powerful, new lens for understanding risk. It lets us move from just reacting to crises to proactively seeing the stresses and hidden connections building up in the system before the first domino even starts to wobble.
When you boil it all down, the paper's core message is this: massive, cascading failures are not random acts of fate. They are a predictable outcome of the geometry of our interconnected world, the way our survival zones overlap and get linked together by shared resources. It's not chaos, it's a system with rules that we can finally begin to understand.
And what's really amazing is that this gives us clear, early warning signals to look for. Are our systems getting more volatile? Are they taking way longer to recover from minor shocks? Are different sectors, like the climate and the economy, starting to move in this perfect kind of ominous lockstep? These are the red flags. These are the signs that the connections are tightening and the risk of a major cascade is going up.
Which brings us to a final, critical question for our time. We spent decades building a more and more interconnected world, believing that it makes us stronger. But this framework forces us to stop and ask, are we actually building a more resilient global system? Or are we just lining up bigger and bigger dominoes, creating the potential for a fall unlike anything we've ever seen before?